The Titanic, the most famous shipwreck in history. Over 1,500 lives lost, yet remembered forever in books, films, and museums. But what if I told you there was another maritime disaster, more than 6 times deadlier, that took over 9,000 lives in a single freezing night? A tragedy so horrifying, yet almost no one has heard its name. This is the forgotten story of the Wilhelm Gustloff. It was January 30th, 1945. World War II was in its final, desperate months. Cities were in ruins. Millions of people were displaced. And in the icy Baltic Sea, a ship prepared to sail, not for glory, not for profit, but for survival. On board were thousands of men, women, and children, crammed together in hope that they might escape the war's final deadly wave. What happened next? Remains the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history, yet has been all but erased from our collective memory. The Wilhelm Gustloff was born in a time of Nazi pride and propaganda. Launched in 1937, she was a symbol of luxury for the German people, a cruise ship for the Strength Through Joy program, offering working-class Germans the vacation of their dreams. Her name came from Wilhelm Gustloff, a Nazi leader assassinated in 1936. The ship was vast, over 25,000 tons, with swimming pools, dance halls, and room for nearly 2,000 passengers in comfort. But luxury does not survive in wartime. In 1939, when the Second World War broke out, the Gustloff was stripped of her tourist glamour and repurposed as a hospital ship. Later, she served as a floating barracks for German Navy personnel. By January 1945, her mission would change once more, this time into a desperate evacuation vessel. She became part of Operation Hannibal, the largest maritime evacuation in history, tasked with rescuing German soldiers and civilians from the advancing Soviet army in East Prussia. The port of Gotenhafen in present-day Gdynia, Poland, was chaos. Refugees poured in by the thousands. Elderly grandparents, terrified mothers with infants, wounded soldiers, and even naval officers. The Gustloff was built for less than 2,000 people. But on that freezing January day, more than 10,000 souls crowded on board. Cabins meant for 2 held 10. Hallways became sleeping quarters. Lifeboats were already packed before the ship left the harbor. And the temperature outside? Minus 18 degrees Celsius. Ice crusted the decks. The sea itself a dark, merciless mirror under the winter sky. Some passengers clung to hope. Others whispered of danger. Soviet submarines were prowling the Baltic. But for many, the choice was simple. Stay and face the advancing Soviet army, or take their chances at sea. At 12:30 p.m., January 30th, 1945, the Wilhelm Gustloff set sail. Her destination, the German port of Kiel. Her route, a dangerous stretch of the Baltic Sea, where enemy submarines could strike without warning. For the first hours, the voyage was eerily calm. Passengers huddled below deck, some singing to keep warm, others silently praying. The captain faced a difficult decision: sail close to the coast and risk running aground on ice, or head into deeper waters and risk submarines. He chose the latter. As night fell, the Gustloff's navigation lights were switched on, a decision that would prove fatal. The reason? To avoid collision with another German vessel. But in doing so, they lit themselves up like a beacon in a sea of predators. At 9:16 p.m., In the freezing blackness of the Baltic, the Soviet submarine S-13, commanded by Captain Alexander Marinesko, spotted the illuminated Gustloff. Marinesko ordered his crew to fire. The first torpedo slammed into the bow. The second tore through the ship's swimming pool, where hundreds of women and children were sheltering. The third struck near the engine room, killing crew and destroying power. In an instant, the lights went out. Panic spread like wildfire. The ship began to list. Water flooded the lower decks. Screams and cries filled the night air. Lifeboats were frozen solid to the ship's frame. Crew and passengers smashed at them with hammers, boots, anything they could find. Some managed to lower a few boats, but in the rush, many overturned. The Baltic that night was an executioner. In water that cold, hypothermia claimed lives in minutes. People clung to debris, screaming for help until their voices faded. Rescue ships responded, but feared more submarine attacks. By the time they arrived, it was too late for most. Of the more than 10,000 on board, barely 1,200 survived. The scale of the disaster should have made headlines across the world, but Nazi Germany kept it secret to avoid crushing morale in the war's final days. After the war, the Allies and Soviets had little interest in publicizing the deaths of Germans, even if most of them were civilians. Survivors carried their trauma in silence. Some never spoke of that night again. For decades, the Wilhelm Gustloff was just a footnote in history, overshadowed by the Titanic, Lusitania, and other shipwrecks remembered in books and films. Today, the wreck of the Wilhelm Gustloff rests at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, a mass grave for over 9,000 souls. It is a reminder of the human cost of war, and of how history chooses which stories to tell, and which to forget. They were not just numbers. They were mothers, fathers, children, each with dreams, fears, and lives abruptly ended in the cold, dark waters of January 1945. We remember them today, because the past deserves witnesses. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and join me in uncovering the forgotten truths of our history. Because the past still speaks, if we're willing to listen.